I'm Brandon Staglin, and this is One Mind Brainwaves.
I'm alive, baby, I'm thriving. Oh, yeah.
Mental illness is a reality that so many families face. In fact, as a previous guest on the show, Dr. Tom Insel, former director of the National Institute of Mental Health, has said, there are two kinds of families in our world: those who are dealing with a serious mental illness and those who are not yet dealing with a mental illness in their family. Well, our first guest is one whose family has moved from the yet to the are. Patrick Dillon has written an amazingly powerful, moving memoir about his family's experience dealing with a serious mental illness. And he details his wife's struggle, and he's going to share about his family's experience with us today. Also, later in the show, we'll be talking with a licensed clinical psychologist about the impact of mental illness on families in general. Dr. Vanita Mehta will join us later in the show. But first, someone who knows all too well what it's like to watch a family member struggle with mental health challenges. He recalls his wife's journey and his family's experience in Safe, Wanted, and Loved, a family memoir of mental illness, heartbreak, and hope. Patrick Dillon, welcome to Brainwaves.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. It's great to have you with us today, and great to see your face. I really enjoyed reading your book and learning about your family's experiences, and to put the actual person to the adventure that was your story and your family's story is just really a treat. So thanks for coming today.
I appreciate it. And Brandon, you and your family obviously are such an inspiration to all of us that have experienced this kind of thing. And so, like I said, it's just an honor and a real treat to be here with you today.
Great, thank you. Awesome. Viewers, if you're welcome to post any comments in the chat section of this webcast at any time. Thank you for watching and participating today. Also, if you believe you can help somebody else that you know by sharing this webcast with them and the information we share, please send this video to them so they can see it. Thank you. So Patrick, let's start with the mystery. You start off your story in your book by kind of interspersing vignettes of how your life with Mia, your wife, began, how your relationship began, how your marriage evolved in its early years, those happy times, with the more challenging times of watching her slowly, her personality kind of change. And what was that like to notice that her behavior was so different from the person you had come to recognize as your wife, over so many years? And what was that like, just to see her behavior change for you?
Yeah, well, like you said, we had known each other for 20 years. I think a lot of people assume that these conditions strike, in the late teens or early 20s, which obviously they do. In my wife's case, it didn't happen until her late 30s. So we had a long time together. We were obviously super close, and she's the smartest person that I've ever met. And it happened very abruptly. Looking back, I think there were probably signs that I missed because I just had no experience with it. But she woke one morning and had a psychotic break. So she was suffering from acute psychosis. And I had obviously read about that in college, and I read articles about it. I knew about it, but I'd never experienced it. It is, when you first experience it, a very frightening thing, probably the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. And, how do you deal with it? Well, I dealt with it not well at first. You're kind of in denial and shock. And and I kept thinking she just needs to get some sleep. She just hasn't slept. And that's why her thoughts are all scattered. But as it starts to dawn on you that your loved one is having a serious, thought disorder and delusions, and thinking things that just there's no way that they could be real, it's a very frightening thing at first. I've thought about that a lot. There's a lot of reasons for it. I mean, but mostly it's such a dramatic change in personality and in character that it takes you aback.
Yeah, and I felt really deeply for you as you went through that. I can imagine how it would be if I couldn't recognize my wife's behavior or personality change, and how hard that would be for me, seeing what you went through there in your story. Similarly, my parents, when I had a psychotic episode, they tell me now they were terrified, and couldn't accept it. Like, it's not our son, right? And so it's so hard
Yeah,
to come to
it's such a
terms.
surreal experience, and what you realize is that the communication that you have on a daily basis, the people that you love, and the reasons why you love them, that you're really in love with their brain. I mean, it sounds funny to say that, but if you choose to spend your life with someone, you love the way they think, you love their sense of humor, um, you love their personality, and uh, you and I know that these are real biological conditions, and there's something happening in the complexity of their brain where their thoughts are not, they just can't connect their thoughts in the normal way. We know that now, and but at the beginning, it's such a incredible change that it's just terrifying. Uh, Obviously, as you gain experience with it, it doesn't become nearly. It's not scary anymore. And as the book progresses, I try to show that this is not anything to be afraid of. It's just it's a symptom of an illness that you just have to deal with like any other symptom that you would. It just happens to be the one thing that makes us uniquely who we are that's affected, and that's what's really um, shocking about it.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I really respect your motivation for writing the book that you did, sharing the story to help people understand it better, through sharing your experience with you vicariously. And we'll talk more about that as we get through the conversation. But at one point in the book, you describe the experience of seeing your wife's personality changes, as you describe them, as unbearable. Um, for you, but your kids had challenges as well, kind of dealing with the changes in Mia's behavior. How did your kids react to her illness, and what did you do to support them?
Yeah, well, that makes the experience that much harder when I mean, our kids are adults now. At the time that this happened 12 years ago, they were a lot younger. They were in sixth and fourth grade, so 11 years old and 9 years old. It is very difficult for an adult to process what's happening in a situation like that with no experience. It's impossible to ask a child to understand what's happened to their mother. And I think I did what most people would do, which is at first try to shield them from it and kind of pretend that mom was just sick and she had to go to the hospital to get better. But this lasted for us an unfortunately long time, and so it was not possible to keep our kids separated from Mia when she was very sick. And so I did the best I could. um, Tried to explain it in a way that they could understand it. um, and then of course I had to call in expert help. I'm not trained to help a child go through anything like that. I was struggling myself. And so I really spent a lot of time making sure that they had the help that they needed, the right therapist to see, someone who they would trust and open up to, someone who could help them deal with what was happening. And all kids are different, and they deal with all the challenges of life in different ways. And my kids, uh, approached this differently or reacted to this differently. My son, as I explain in the book, had severe separation anxiety. He felt like he lost one parent, and he was really afraid of losing the other. And so he never wanted to leave my side, which is problematic when he's supposed to be in school. So that was a difficult challenge for us. And my daughter, who's always been very creative, she came up with a kind of very imaginative story of what happened to her mom. Aliens had abducted her and put a robot in her place, and the robot was malfunctioning, that kind of thing, which helped her cope. But I knew, you know, she needed to talk through it as well. So, you know, we did that. I'm happy to say that, you know, our story has a happy ending. Maybe that's a spoiler, but the kids are doing great. We have a very, as you can imagine, very open and honest conversation about mental health in our family. And I think our kids are way stronger and way more open-minded, and I think understanding than they otherwise would have been.
Well, that's a great upshot of the overall experience, to hear that your kids have learned so much from the experience, and as you have too, and as when you're sharing with readers, they can learn as well. As Tom Insel, as I mentioned, he was a previous guest on the show, has said, he feels it's like, when a bone heals after it breaks, that the point where it heals is stronger than it was before. And I feel that way about my own experience with schizophrenia as well, having recovered from it. I've learned so much from having to adapt to it and find ways to manage it and accepting it and having a life nonetheless that I still care about.
Yeah, in fact, we watched, my wife and I watched a video that One Minded published with your family story. And at one point you say, as soon as you stopped fighting the illness and accepted it, that's when the real healing began. And my wife stopped the video and said, that's exactly right. That is her experience to a T. And I think all of our experience, and I had my own, I suffered PTS as a result of this. It comes out at the end of the book. And in fact, the book was my therapy. Writing the book was the way I dealt with my own mental health condition. And I agree completely. And I think that's very profound, because I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. You say in the book that when you're talking about your commitment or family's commitment to a person they love who's experiencing these serious challenges, quote, you need someone who believes in you, will stick by your side and never give up. That is such a powerful, resonant quote. It really means a lot to me. How is it that your family was so supportive as well? Your family, Mia's family, and how did they help you cope with the challenges that you were facing with Mia's condition as it changed?
Yeah, we couldn't have gotten through it without the support of our family, especially my wife's family. Each one of them rallied and helped us. And I really go through that in the book. She has a brother who's an emergency med doctor who was there on the day that she woke up with psychosis. I would have been helpless without him. He kind of took the reins and got us the help that we needed. And he was supportive throughout. She has a sister that came to us when we really needed her, and did a great job of kind of helping the kids through it. And she has another brother who's a main character in the book, in the story, who dropped everything and came and lived with us for 3.5 months. He's a very funny guy and a colorful guy, and there was the silver lining to the story is that we got very close to him as well. And then my family too, very supportive. I throughout the book, I say, I don't know how people do this that don't have the kind of support from their family and their friends that we had. It's unimaginable to me, and unfortunate that there are so many people out there that don't have it and end up in not recovering. And it's a real shame, because as Dr. Insel spoke about on your last Brainwaves, these are conditions that can be treated, and with the right support and the right 3 Ps as he talked about, people can stabilize and they can recover and they can have really happy, productive lives. You wouldn't think it at the time when you're going through it, but you have to keep that in your mind. And that's what I kept doing. I was not willing to give up, and I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, your resolve and your resilience are just really a model for me, and just to see how strong you were all throughout, even as your emotions were changing during that time. Just really a powerful story.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Brandon, but the real hero is my wife. And as much as
Yeah.
I went through and as hard as it was,
Mhm.
she is to me the real heroine of the story. And she's so strong, and like you and other folks that get through this, it's just amazing to me.
Well, thank you for that acknowledgement. Yeah, Mia does sound incredibly amazing. I would love a chance to meet her at some point as well, and thank her for being a part of the story that you shared. Um, you come to learn during the memoir that your wife has this rare condition of the brain. Throughout the book, you discuss the various obstacles you faced in navigating the mental health care system. What did you find most challenging in that process, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, the most challenging part of our ordeal is that it was not covered. Most of it was not covered by our insurance. And, as Patrick Kennedy has so strongly advocated for mental health parity, and there are various laws that have been passed that should provide that to us. But unfortunately, there's a lot of work yet to be done, and I know he's a strong advocate for that. We suffered from that, and that was uh, again, I don't know how people do it that don't have the resources. We were fortunate in that we had, we could go through this without having to declare bankruptcy. But when you pay for insurance and you have a serious illness and the insurance doesn't cover it, that is, that's an awful situation to face, and it's very unfair. And I
Mhm.
struggled mightily with my insurance company, and I protested as much as I could. In the end, I just had to deal with it, and I dealt with the best I could. That was the hardest part of navigating the kind of healthcare. We were fortunate in that we had tremendous help from psychiatrists who were fantastic, psychologists, therapists, social workers, counselors. We really lucked out with the people that we encountered along the way. But it was it was really in spite of, instead of as a result of, the healthcare coverage that we had.
Yeah, it's so hard. And what you're saying is going to resonate with so many families out there who go through the same thing. We need to build a more equitable, accessible healthcare system with the coverage that will enable people to use it. What advice might you have for other families who are dealing with the exact same challenge?
Well, I've thought about it, and the one thing that I would change if I could go back, or if I had to go back, I guess, and live through that again, is I would be open from the very start. Uh, I was trying to hide what was happening. As you know, the stigma is a very real part of our society, and it has ramifications across a lot of different areas. And I was fearful that my wife's career would be put in jeopardy. I was fearful that people would look at her differently, that she would have a lot of prejudice if this came out, against her, discrimination. And so I tried desperately to keep this secret, and it just added so much stress to an already very stressful situation. And what happened when, it got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. There was too much that I had to do, and keeping her illness a secret just fell off the list of priorities. When that happened, all of a sudden, the kind of support and encouragement, not just from the family, but from our broader group of friends, people I didn't even know that well, just came pouring in. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, everyone's dealing with this in some way or another. It might not be acute psychosis or schizophrenia or something like that, but everyone's family, as Dr. Insel said, right? Everyone's family either is dealing with it now or will be dealing with it or has dealt with it. And so you just, I, again, if I could go back, my advice is don't try to hide it. Don't,
Mm.
it's nothing to be shameful about. This is a condition, an illness like any other illness. And if you had a family member that had a heart disease or diabetes or, you know, cancer or something, you wouldn't feel like you had to hide it in shame or not tell anyone about it. you'd reach out immediately for all the support you could get. And that would be my one piece of advice.
Right on. Thank you for sharing that. Families who deal with this deserve the support. So what compelled you to share your story? And why did you use a pen name?
Yeah. So my wife was the reason the story is published. As I mentioned, I started writing the story as my own therapy, and I got about 50 pages in and it made tremendous progress and felt like I really didn't need to write anymore. But my wife read it and said, I think you need to keep writing this, because if we can help even one person by sharing our story, then we need to do that. And as you mentioned, my wife has a very extremely rare, according to the DSM, or most psychiatrists, an extremely rare condition, which is related to bipolar, but it's called unipolar mania. So she suffers manic episodes that quickly spiral into manic psychosis. I guarantee you that it's more common than what people think. And I'm sure there are people out there suffering like we were, who, with the right medication and support, I mean, my wife has been completely normal, happy, productive for 8 years. And if we can help someone do that, we need to do it. So she's the reason why I finished the book. And when I decided to finish it, I went back and I decided I'm going to try to write something that not only will help people struggling through this in a similar way, but hopefully can draw in and engage people that haven't yet maybe suffered through a mental health crisis in their family, to make it more real, to bring them in and let them understand that this isn't something to be frightened of, and this isn't something that's different from any other illness. This is something that we need to treat in the same way. And then using a pen name was, other than going through this ordeal, it was the hardest thing I've had to do. I am so proud of my wife. I'm so proud of our family. And I'm just so proud of how we got through this, that I want nothing more than to put my name on that book. But these stories aren't just our stories, they're our family story. And the stigma is real. And it, as I said, it has ramifications for people. And we had certain family members that felt strongly that they just didn't want the story being public. And so the kind of compromise was, I would change my name, we would change the locations and identifiers throughout, but that we would tell it. The only thing that's changed are the identifiers. I mean, everything else is exactly what happened, and it's authentic. And so that's how that decision came about.
Well, thanks for your courage, and I'm glad you were able to navigate your family and come to a solution that everyone could feel comfortable with. And thank you for sharing your story as a result of all that. I did want to ask you one last question. It's something we ask at the end of every Brainwaves interview. You may know this. I love that the word hope is included in the subtitle of your book. What gives you hope?
Well, how our story turned out gives me a lot of hope, because my wife, as I said, is fully recovered, and our family's stronger because of it. The stigma is something that has to change, and I'm hopeful because even in the last year, we've seen more and more people speaking out that have a platform that can reach a large audience. My book, I'm hopeful a lot of people read it, but I'm realistic to know that it can't reach the number of people that Lady Gaga can reach, for example, or Dua Lipa, or Simone Biles, or Michael Phelps, or all of these very strong, charismatic individuals that aren't hiding and are speaking out about this, because that's what it's going to take to change the conversation. It started, I mean, Jesse Close, Glenn Close, and what their family did, what your family's doing. There's so many people now that are speaking up about this, and that gives me a lot of hope.
Excellent. I agree. There's a movement to actually change the conversation, and you're a very important voice in that movement. Thanks for being a part of all that's going on in that area, a very important part with your amazing story. Thank you for sharing your story with us today, Patrick. And I know it's going to help so many people out there to know about it. Viewers, to learn more about the story of Patrick Dillon's family, Safe, Wanted, and Loved, please visit the website that he set up, safewantedlove.com, where you can also purchase the book and learn more about mental health in general. So, Patrick, thank you so much for being with us on Brainwaves today.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
Awesome. You're welcome. Take care. Our next guest is a clinical psychologist with a private practice in Washington, D.C. She also has written extensively for various news outlets, including Psychology Today. And she's most recently written a series of articles for that publication on the impact of mental illness on families. Dr. Vinita Mehta, thank you so much for joining us on Brainwaves today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be with you.
Absolutely. Really appreciate your sharing your expertise and wisdom with us today. So viewers, don't forget, you can post questions and comments in the chat section of this webcast at any time. Whatever occurs to you, please do. And also, if the information you're learning from this webcast, you feel it would benefit someone that you know, could you please share this webcast with them? Thank you. So Vinita, we know that families can be a critical support system for people who experience serious mental illness. In fact, it can make a large difference in the treatments they receive and the outcomes they experience. But what about the other direction of influence? What about how does the serious mental illness that people can experience impact their families, in particular their spouses or their children?
Well, I think that because mental illness is something that we don't talk about openly, and there isn't a lot of knowledge and awareness in the larger society, when a loved one starts exhibiting symptoms of a mental illness, it's even hard to know for a lot of people what it is that they're seeing. So I think a lot of people know what sadness looks like or know what anxiety looks like. Those are very common experiences that a lot of people can relate to. But I think that when we start getting into the realm of psychosis or exhibiting sort of what we would see, how to explain this? Basically, they're positive and negative symptoms that we call associated with schizophrenia, for example. And sometimes people get confused by what it is that they're seeing. That a loved one who may have sort of an appearance that they're not used to seeing, or a sluggishness, or perhaps speech might be changing, and so it can be even hard to identify what it is that we're seeing. And so I think even when it starts out, it can be very confusing, and then once you sort of enter the system, the mental health system, that can then be very overwhelming. Sometimes it's very hard to diagnose what it is that we see, and but even then, once a clear diagnosis is made, then you start dealing with, am I getting the supports that I need? Is my insurance going to cover this? It just kind of it just reverberates out how much support is needed and how much we're still basically failing in that regard as a society.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Benita. That resonates with me and my family's experience. When I was developing schizophrenia, they had no idea, how to interpret the behaviors I was making and having and doing. I would inexplicably say, twirl around in circles or speak incoherently, and it scared them as much as it did me, I think. So it can be very scary, as you say, for families to deal with this. Our previous guest, who was just on the show, Patrick, has described the fear and uncertainty surrounding his wife's onset of psychosis, similar to what you're describing there, and how he felt a need to protect his children from something that he didn't even understand himself, right? So how can a parent help to create a safe and secure environment, a feeling of safety and security for his children and his family? And how can, at the same time, the healthy parent, maintain their own mental well-being while dealing with all of these different, scary and difficult situations.
I think his story is extraordinary in a number of regards, but I think that he really nailed it when he talked about all the support that they received from his wife's siblings to friends, to be able to talk about it openly. I think that that's a really important piece of it for children. I think they're so mystified by what it is that they're seeing. And so when it becomes demystified, it's like, okay, this is now being explained to me. I have some handle on what I'm seeing, to the degree that children can make sense of these things. But I think the demystification of what's happening would help to lessen the fear. I think also being able to talk about it very openly makes it something that that they don't have to feel ashamed of, which is the shame that comes along when a person in your family, someone that you love, is suffering from mental illness, and then the feeling that you can't even talk about something that is impacting your day-to-day life is such a burden in and of itself. So I think that those are places to start, the support, but also the demystification, but also just basically just breaking apart the stigma and being able to talk about it openly, and openly receive the support that people are offering. I think that's a very key thing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've heard from and experienced this myself, but I heard from people who've started to be open about their or their family's mental illness, including Patrick, about how when they first started to be open about it, there was that outpouring of support, which they didn't expect initially, right? And it seems like if you keep something in the dark, it's even scarier than if you let it out into the light. Do you find that to be true?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that even I can say in my clinical experience, my own patients, that those patients of mine who grew up with mentally ill parents, that just to be able to talk about what they experienced, to name what they experienced. I mean, again, I receive mail after every time I write an article for Psychology Today about growing up with a parent who experienced mental illness, and it is probably the one topic that I get mail for the most, just saying, thank you for naming that. I didn't even understand the impact that it had on me. But if we could talk about it openly, then we could really name what's happening, but also receive the support that's really needed and appreciated in trying to get those services and trying to resolve the challenge.
I love what you're saying. It's going to help so many of our viewers. Thank you. So what are some of the long-term effects of trauma of this sort on the children of a mentally ill parent? And how does stigma affect that trauma?
Well, I think that for so many families who are experiencing this, that the isolation that they can feel if they don't have a place to talk about what it is that they're experiencing, that shame can go very, very deep. And so I think that that is something that, I read about it in the research and I hear about it in my office, the shame that they carry. And then I think also for a lot of children who then become adults, there's that there is a real kind of conflict with wanting to live their own lives, but also feeling that they have to take care of their parent who's ill. And that again speaks to the lack of supports, because maybe that conflict wouldn't be so strong, and who knows, maybe not even be there if there were more systemic supports, places to go. We're thinking about treatment and long-term treatment and societal kind of structures for people who are experiencing serious mental illness, that perhaps, I think that burden could be shifted from children in isolation or families in isolation to something just much more openly supported.
Totally, it should be that way. And our system had been evolving towards something like that a few decades ago. As Tom Insel, Dr. Tom Insel, was our previous guest on last month's show, talked about in his book Healing, which releases very soon. Yeah, I think there is potential to have that happen, but we need to make it happen. We need to advocate for that. And so I'm so glad you're sharing this today.
We can make it happen. It's really just an allocation of resources and just, I think, education, being able to talk about it in those places that are first points of contact. So in the schools, among when you meet with physicians, even public campaigns, really just getting the word out. I mean, what we're doing now here. So those points of contact where you can raise awareness. And again, I think the demystification of what mental illness is would help. Yeah, I just think it would just be a very huge and helpful step.
Absolutely. You've examined, various aspects of these family relationships, which are still, as we see, the first line of care for people with serious mental illness. You've especially examined the parent-child relationship. And thankfully, it's not all difficult news, as you've reported. What are some of what studies have shown about how children can build resilience and adaptability through their experiences with a mentally ill parent?
This is an area that I feel very passionate about because I think this is true for a lot of different types of trauma. There's a concept that we call post-traumatic growth. And the idea is that a person, you don't wish that the trauma had happened, but you can actually grow from a trauma and have a level of resilience that goes beyond what you had previous to the trauma. And so I think that that's the silver lining. And I think that when we think about, trauma doesn't have to be something that that is a burden or some albatross that stays with you forever. It can be something that you could look at and you say, this made me stronger, and I have you can really see what is it that I can now do, and what is it that I can now withstand that I wasn't able to before. How can I be helpful or of service now to other people in a way that I wouldn't have been had this not happened.
Thank you. That really resonates with me deeply. And I think that people really can learn from their traumas and grow, as I've experienced, and so many who responded to one of my social media have said. So thanks for sharing that. So finally, Vanita, what gives you hope?
Oh gosh, I think that, a couple of things. One is, I think that just because of the work that I do, I actually bear witness to people changing their lives. It's not some abstract thing. I see people resilient in the face of challenge, whether that be them, suffering from a serious mental illness, or a close family member of somebody who is. So I see it. It's possible. I mean, and I think too, it's just there is an idea that I learned actually in my journalist days. In talking with people from the NIH, like Dr. Insel and others, and we are learning so much about the brain. And when we first started out, when the field started out, there was this idea that the brain was static, like all the major development was going to happen up until age 5, and that was going to be sort of like 0 to 5 was it. But what we've learned in this golden age of neuroscience is that the brain is really plastic. And so, the adult brain is it's capable of changing even as an adult. So when people come to me and they say, is it too late for me? I was like, well, your brain is telling you actually that it's not. It's a plastic organ, and the architecture is there to make that change. I think that that's actually one of the most hopeful stories in the field.
Absolutely. That is so true. And so, it just flies in the face of the old wives' tale that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. You totally can, right?
Yeah. These are solvable. We can resolve these things. And so I would just say to anybody who is really really struggling that, there is hope, and there are many success stories to look to for hope.
For sure. That growth mindset is something we, can really benefit from if we understand what can always learn and grow from our experiences. Absolutely. Vanita, thank you so much for being with us on Brainwaves today, and for sharing your very wise insights with our audience. Viewers, thank you too for watching. If you'd like to see any of our past Brainwaves episodes, please check out onemind.org/brainwaves, where you can sign up for our e-newsletter as well to be alerted of future Brainwaves episodes. And thanks so much for watching. And remember, what is the brain good for? Making waves, of course. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Every day trying to find the strength. I just want things to go back to normal.
Science is racing to find treatments for the virus. Vaccines are on the horizon.
I don't know what to do.
But what about the mental health research needed to sustain our lives during and after the crisis? OneMind is funding the science to revolutionize treatments and provide hope. OneMind, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.
I'm living my best life.